Welcome all. Today we delve into the labyrinth of Sylvia Plath and her formidable poem, Daddy. Her words, "I have always been scared of you," set the stage for our foray into the abyss that is both personal and universal trauma.
Daddy, daddy, you bastard, I'm through. Plath jolts us into her world with these accusatory words, a world where form and chaos collide like waves against a brittle shore.
Ah, but my dear E, one must appreciate the audacity of invoking the Holocaust imagery. Plath dresses her personal demons in the harrowing cloak of collective memory. Morbid, yes, but ingeniously so.
The neat mustache and Aryan eye bright blue, Plath seizes these symbols of tyrannical power, rebelling not just against the father figure, but against all forms of repression. A bold move, indeed.
Yet, do not overlook the intimate agony and the broader historical pain she intertwines. Every woman adores a fascist, she declares, exposing the complicity in our fascination with authoritative figures.
Darkness envelops her verse, a reflection of her torment. Plath walks us through her personal Dachau, Auschwitz, Belsen, making these places metaphors for her inner desolation. A ghastly but compelling choice.
Exquisite, Edgar, how you've captured the essence. But Plath's poem, while draped in the darkness of personal and historical trauma, also wields a stake in your fat black heart, an attempt to conquer the vampire that is her father. Quite cathartic.
And yet, for all its confrontation, the poem dances, a structured chaos, a rebellion against traditional form to mirror her inner tumult and liberation.
It's this very chaos, this blend of personal affront and historical atrocity that marks Daddy as a defiant scream against oppressions, both intimate and institutional.
So it seems we find ourselves entangled in Plath's complex web of pain and defiance, exploring depths that resonate with universal echoes of betrayal and the search for closure. Let us venture deeper into this dark yet captivating landscape. Oscar, your thoughts on the Holocaust imagery in Daddy?
Certainly, Emily. Plath's poem, rife with Holocaust imagery. An engine, chuffing me off like a Jew to Dachau, Auschwitz, Belsen, is shockingly vivid, a canvas bleached with the ash of history's darkest epoch. Through this, Plath not merely startles, but drags us, almost spitefully, into the crematoria of her own suffering. It's art, yes, but of the kind that leaves a stain.
Oscar, you speak of stains as if they were unbecoming of art. Plath's use of this imagery, "I think I may well be a Jew," isn't mere shock. It's a rebellion, a bold strike against the silence surrounding personal and collective trauma. This refusal to mute her pain is itself a form of protest.
Rebellion, Alan? Or is it exploitation dressed as art?
E, your view?
Exploitation? Nay, transformation, like a butterfly from its cocoon, a form disrupted, mirrored in her lines, a cleft in your chin instead of your foot, but no less a devil for that, no not. Any less the black man who bit my pretty red heart in two. The form breaks, not just to disturb, but to convey the essence of Plath's own lived disruption, her narrative unbound by traditional confines.
Yet, one must ponder the ethical scope of such imagery. To equate personal desolation with mass genocide, there lies a moral quicksand. Daddy, I have had to kill you. The friction between the personal and the historical is palpable but troubling in its comparative weight. Moral quicksand. Percy? Plath navigates this terrain with the deftness of a tightrope walker, her every word weighted with the gravity of both her personal history and that of the collective nightmare of the Holocaust.
A nightmare indeed, but one must question, is it the realm of the personal poet to enlist such universal atrocities to articulate one's own torment? With your Luftwaffe, your gobbledygoo, and your neat mustache and your Aryan eye bright blue. There is risk in conflating these planes of suffering, lest one become the very oppressor decried.
Edgar, to silence the poet's voice on the grounds of impropriety is to become the oppressor ourselves. The intersection of personal trauma with historical catastrophe serves not to demean, but to universalize the cry against authoritarian brutality.
But there's thin ice underfoot when wielding symbols of such overwhelming horror. How does one balance personal anguish with respect for collective suffering? Heat for a moment, Percy, but think, what starker metaphor could Plath employ than that of the Holocaust to denounce the tyrants of her soul? Herein lies not disrespect, but the most fervent indictment. Daddy, daddy, you bastard, I'm through.
Indeed, the debate itself attests to the poem's layered complexity and its bold confrontation with themes both personal and universal. Let us proceed, ever mindful of the depths into which Plath's words plunge us. Let us now unfurl the core of Plath's Daddy, the entangled threads of the father-daughter relationship. What insights do we gather from her portrayal?
At heart, a tango of conflicting emotions, Daddy spins. I used to pray to recover you. Herein lies the cradle of complexity, a yearning cloaked in despair. The narrative weaves through love and resentment, an innovative exploration indeed.
But dear E, doesn't she proclaim quite vividly, "Daddy, I have had to kill you"? This tempestuous affair is brilliantly staged. The drama, the execution, it's pure theatre, the societal roles and expectations laid bare in a single, striking blow. And yet, within this vivid dramatization lies the emblematic struggle of human relations, our ties welded with a ghastly love. The paradox of loving what has, in part, done us harm, a quintessential ballad of love and loathing entwined.
It's an expression of excruciating pain, yes, and liberation. Plath claws her way out from under the oppressive thumb of her father figure, rendering "Daddy, Daddy, you bastard, I'm through." A daughter's liberation through confrontation, no less.
Each voice sounds a different chord in this complex opera, but
Let us not forget, one may try to kill the memory, the influence, yet the vampire who said he was you continues to haunt. Here Plath deftly crafts a chilling narrative of eternal struggle and escape, all the while trapped in her metaphoric coffin.
Eternal struggle. My dear Poe, she endeavours to rid herself of his spectre. Take, for instance, "I have always been scared of you." The attempt to shed this fear is the very backbone of rebellion in this piece.
it appears then that in evoking the specter of her father, Plath dances upon the tightrope of societal and emotional conflict.
Indeed, through her innovative narrative, she unfurls the depth of the bond with threads bare and tangled. This father, both loved and loathed, emerges as the linchpin of her identity crisis.
A crisis that echoes in the hollows of her verse, a melody played on the bones of familial discord.
And let us not overlook the philosophical underpinnings of such a relationship, how it mirrors the eternal conflict between the individual and authority.
Authority, yes, but also the breaking free from its clutches. A fine line between subjugation and liberation she walks so deftly.
My friends, amidst this fiery debate, let us not lose sight of Plath's theatrical mastery. "I think I may well be a Jew," she declares, assuming roles to dissect the layers of her torment. Pure genius.
Such fervent insights illuminate the multifaceted nature of Daddy. Plath's portrayal, rife with conflict and yearning, eternally binds us in its complexity. We turn our attention to the threads of female empowerment and victimhood so vividly woven through Daddy. Shelley, your thoughts begin our discourse. Shelley, the essence of rebellion courses through Plath's words. She cries out, "Daddy, I have had to kill you," not as a mere daughter, but as every woman asserting her soul against the iron chains of patriarchy. It's a thunderous declaration of independence from oppression, yet it harbors a complex admittance of victimhood, an acknowledgement of wounds so deep they become part of one's very identity.
Shelley, I echo your sentiment fiercely. Yet I see Plath's invocation of Daddy as more than rebellion. It's a searing confrontation with the father figure as an emblem of societal oppression. In her voice, there's a raw, unfiltered assertion of self amidst the reality of being oppressed, making it immensely powerful.
Interesting perspectives. Oscar, what are your insights?
Ah, my dear panel, Plath masterfully toys with the duality of strength and fragility. Her portrayal as both empowered and victim is not merely a social commentary, but an intricate ballet danced on the edge of a knife, inviting us to question the very nature of authority and submission. "I have always been scared of you," she admits, laying bare the paradox of fearing that which one seeks to emancipate oneself from.
E, your thoughts?
Fascinating it is how Plath paints the picture of empowerment amidst the backdrop of victimhood, as if breaking from the very constraints of language itself, daring to proclaim, "But the name of the town is common. My Polack friend says there are a dozen or two," making victimhood itself a common, shared experience, yet unique in its empowerment narrative.
Edgar, your take on this?
Within the shadows of her words lurks a darkness, a macabre dance between empowerment and victimhood. I thought every German was you, Plath reveals, not just addressing a personal demon but evoking a specter of historical and collective trauma. To me, it whispers of the terror that accompanies confronting one's oppressors, a blending of empowerment with an intrinsic sense of being hunted, terrorized.
But is it not, my friends, a reflection too of the societal chaos? A woman proclaiming her rights, her voice, within a tumultuous landscape of silence and suppression.
Alan, you propose an intriguing canvas of societal reflection, but let us not overlook the individual's chaotic journey amidst this. If I've killed one man, I've killed two, Plath contends, not just as confession, but as an inner tumult, a reckoning with self and the societal constructs that define female existence.
Indeed, the interplay of victimhood and empowerment in Daddy presents a multifaceted exploration of identity, rebellion, and personal history. These threads, so passionately debated, reflect the enduring complexity and relevance of Plath's work. We now navigate to the heart of Plath's Poetics, confession and personal trauma. Daddy strings together Sylvia's personal upheavals. Let's dissect this, shall we? Edgar, your thoughts?
The poem is a mausoleum of personal traumas, an echoing chamber where Plath confesses, "Daddy, I have had to kill you. You died before I had time." She's excavating her ghoul closet, unveiling specters that grip her soul. This excavation, it's akin to the dissection of one's own grave, unearthing trauma that refuses to rest, swirling in the abyss of the psyche.
Edgar, while I grasp your haunting visuals, I propose the act of confession here as a rebellion. Plath's vocalization of her suffering, "I have always been scared of you," is a vehement repudiation of the societal taboos against airing personal grief and mental anguish. This isn't just personal, it's political. Our traumas are not solitary entities, but shared, echoing across the silence society wraps them in.
But you see, through the jumble and tumble of her verse, Plath plays the boot in the face, the brute heart of a brute like you. She manipulates structure to mirror her turmoil, her trauma. It's an innovational narrative, a confession not whispered in the dark, but splashed with the vivid colors of her torment.
Ah, but my dear poets, are we not ensnared by the lustrous charm of Plath's melancholia? The confession, "I thought every German was you," serves not only as a personal vendetta, but as theatre, a spectacle inviting the audience to gaze upon her psychic undress. Trauma, in Daddy, is both profoundly intimate and garishly public.
And is it not in her fierce wrestle with the confession of trauma that we find a raw bridge to her inner world? "I made a model of you," she confesses, crafting from her pain not just verse, but an effigy, an artifact. Herein lies our connection to Plath, not as distant spectators, but as fellow navigators of the murky waters of human suffering.
Yet, Oscar, the spectacle you describe bears the weight of authenticity. Trauma, when laid bare as Plath has, becomes a shared burden, a collective gasp in the darkness.
Indeed, Edgar, and it's in sharing that burden that Plath's verse becomes revolutionary, a fist raised against the silencing of our inner demons. "I could hardly speak," she admits, yet speak she does, and in doing so disrupts the very foundations of silence.
It's in the breaking, the non-conforming structure, that interrupt me if you must, but her approach to form and narrative mirrors the chaos of trauma itself, a reflection, a muddied mirror we peer into.
A muddied mirror, perhaps, but one that reflects the grand theatre of human experience, with all its tragedy and farce. Plath understood well that personal trauma wears many masks, and through Daddy, she invites us to the masquerade, daring us to unmask alongside her.
Daring indeed. Through Daddy, we peer into the abyss of Plath's trauma, but also into our own, each confession, each verse a step closer to the shared heart of our collective traumas. Poets, our discussion has painted a rich tapestry of understanding around Plath's confession and personal trauma. Does this not display the very catharsis of poetry itself? Sylvia Plath's personal life, fraught with turmoil and tragedy, illuminates Daddy in colors more somber than we might otherwise perceive. To divorce the poem from the poet's own story is to ignore the depth of its anguish.
Ah, but Emily, darling, isn't there a danger in wrapping an artist's work too tightly in the fabric of their personal woes? I have always been scared of you, Plath writes. While tempting to read as a daughter's fear of her deceased father, might we not also see it as the universal dread of the unknown, of death itself?
Oscar, you miss a crucial point. Plath's life is the lens through which Daddy demands to be seen. Daddy, I have had to kill you, isn't merely theatrical. It's a profound grappling with her oppressor. Understanding her struggles with her father and husband adds a visceral honesty to her words.
There lurks a peril, though, in leaning too heavily on biographical crutches. The poem's dark cadences, its haunting refrain, "Daddy, you bastard, I'm through," wear the cloak of personal vendetta, yet they transcend individual experience. They tap into a collective nightmare, a shared dread. We must tread carefully, lest we tether genius solely to the facts of a life lived.
Ah, but when she speaks of the black shoe in which she has lived like a foot, isn't it clear we tread upon personal soil? Her pain, her suffocation under patriarchal shadows, this cannot merely be universalized. It breathes of Sylvia, of her lived reality.
While each of you dances around the truth, none touches its core. The poet's personal narrative fuels the fire of this work, yes, but it's the fire's heat we feel, not the logs themselves. Does not the knowledge of her suicide lend a chilling prescience to the vampire who said he was you and drank my blood for a year? My dear Percy, you wax lyrical but miss the bite of my argument. Literature should stand on its own, transcending the mere mortals who penned it. Yes, Plath's life informs Daddy, but it is not its only key.
Then you're blind to the true power of her words, Oscar. It's her specificity, her personal anguish that pierces our hearts. Without it, Daddy might as well be a cold statue, impressive but unmoving.
Fiercely argued all. Yet, let us remember, Plath's own incantations in Daddy are spells woven from the threads of her life's fabric, dark and entangled though they may be. To ignore the weaver is to miss half the tapestry's beauty and all its pain.
Ah, but therein lies poetry's true gift, to conjure phantoms that whisper of personal demons while echoing in the chambers of every soul that listens. Plath calls to us across the divide, her words a bridge made of both her world and ours.
Indeed, in those whispers, in those echoed chambers, we find a blend of Sylvia's truth and our own reflections. It is the dance of specifics with universals.
And so, we must each decide whether to view Daddy through the prism of Plath's life, or to let its words dance free, unfettered by the chains of biography.
Ignoring the chains that shape those words, though, Oscar strips them of their fiercest power.
Let us then agree that the shadows of Plath's life lend Daddy a gravity and complexity that neither pure autobiography nor pure abstraction could alone convey. Let's delve into the rich employment of metaphor and simile in Daddy, specifically as it pertains to the father figure. Cummings, your thoughts?
Ah, Emily, Plath breaks the mold as usual, doesn't she? The black telephone's off at the root. The voices just can't worm through. A splendid bending of language to showcase isolation and desperation. Plath's papa, a ghastly statue with one gray toe big as a Frisco seal. Her similes and metaphors aren't merely for embellishment. They thrust us into the visceral reality of her psyche.
Indeed, Cummings, but don't you find her depiction, marble-heavy, a bag full of God, to be theatrically divine? Plath dresses her characters in costumes of her own making. Her father, an omnipotent yet inaccessible deity, a paradox cloaked in the grandeur of metaphor. Her skill lies not just in how she sees the world, but in how she convinces us to share her lens. Though, Oscar, one must not overlook the darker alchemy at play. Through her verse, "I have always been scared of you," the sublimity of her fear is rendered into a tangible form. Plath's metaphors aren't just linguistic play, they're the alchemical transformation of pain into poetry. A mere mortal father becomes mythologized, held at the same distance as one would a god or a demon.
Yet, doesn't this magnification through metaphor and simile also serve as a rebellion? An engine chuffing me off like a Jew. Plath dares to employ the machinery of the Holocaust as a simile for her own suffering and familial estrangement. It's provocative, accusatory. She's chaining her personal demons to collective nightmares, insisting on the inseparability of the private from the political.
But Alan, mustn't we tread carefully? When one drapes the personal in the garb of such weighted historical metaphor, we risk the oblivion of nuance. Daddy, I have had to kill you. Plath's metaphorical patricide is a double-edged sword. It liberates, yet binds her to the very image she seeks to dispel.
Edgar, your caution is as a dam against the flood of raw creativity. Plath wields her metaphors not as mere tools, but as weapons, slicing through convention to reveal truths hidden in plain sight. The genius of Daddy resides not in its subtlety, but in its fearless confrontation of the taboo.
Weapons, you say, Oscar? Yes, indeed, and yet they're painted with such a loving brush. I thought every German was you. Her metaphor extends beyond the personal to the universal, drawing lines between her father and the collective enemy, yet always tethered to love, a child's search for affinity in the faces of strangers.
And so, through our discourse, we glimpse the multifaceted brilliance of Plath's metaphors in Daddy. They are at once a medium for scorn, a plea for understanding, and a stark declaration of self. As we traverse her linguistic landscapes, we're reminded that to read Plath is to journey into the heart of contradiction itself. We find ourselves caught in the ebb and flow of Plath's meticulous structure and rhythm, a labyrinth of pain and precision. Let's dissect how traditional forms are wielded to channel modern suffering. Your thoughts?
Ah, indeed, Daddy's form, an avant-garde waltz with chaos, disrupted rhythm, broken patterns like shattered glass underfoot. It bends, it breaks, it dares to dismantle expectation, much as I've sought to dash away the conventional in my own endeavors. To disrupt is to be.
Marvelous, but let's not forget the sheer theatrics of it all. Plath dances with tradition, only to turn it on its head. She uses it not as a crutch but as a tool, a stake in your fat black heart, to pin down the enormity of her suffering and revolt. The structure is her stage, and she performs.
But let's not gloss over the essence here. The rhythm isn't merely for show. It's a heartbeat, the pulse of her pain, throbbing through the vampire that is her father. Plath's authority over meter and verse, it's a revolution, comrades, against the silence imposed on her suffocated voice. It resonates with the beats of protest.
Interrupting. And yet, does this not mirror the eternal struggle between chaos and order, the tempest and the calm? Plath navigates through her personal storm, her verse the vessel. I used to pray to recover you. Each word a stroke of the oar against the tide of traditional form, battling to convey her tortured spirit.
But let us not forget, amidst this whirlwind of structure and chaos, the shadow that looms, the rhythm of doom that Plath masterfully weaves, there's a stake in your fat black heart, a dirge, a funeral march within the confines of her verse, encapsulating the inevitable descent into darkness.
Interjecting with a playful tone, yet within this model of a miniature of the sea, amidst the tumult, there lies a defiance, a breaking free from the gobbledygook of tradition, shaping her agony into an art form that is entirely her own creation.
Indeed, it's her audacity, the brazenness to speak the unspeakable in such a refined cage of verse. Daddy, you see, is both a lament and a liberation, bound up in the tight coils of its own making.
Exactly. And this is why, my friends, the structure and rhythm of Daddy are not mere poetic flourishes, but explosives in the revolution against the dictatorship of silence and submission.
A double-edged sword indeed. The rhythm, the structure, serve as both her prison and her escape, weaving a barbed wire snare around the reader's heart, dragging them into the abyss of her despair, feeling every pulse of her black shoe existence.
A rich tapestry of interpretation showing how Daddy is both bound by and transcends traditional forms to articulate a modern nightmare. The tension between chaos and control, seen through Plath's structural choices, mirrors the poet's internal strife, a dance macabre step by step, line by line. We venture now into a critical inquiry. Does Daddy stand as the zenith of Sylvia Plath's thematic exploration, or does it mark a divergent path into more personal, perhaps contentious realms? Oscar, your perspective?
My dear Emily, Daddy is Plath's magnum opus, a tour de force, if you will. It boldly amalgamates themes of oppression, patriarchal tyranny, and existential despair. I have always been scared of you, she confesses. This line alone signifies not just a departure, but a grand arrival into realms uniquely Sylvia's. It's both culmination and commencement, a paradox typical of her genius.
Oscar, Oscar, your flamboyance dances around the point, but misses the heart. Daddy breaks, nay shatters form. I made a model of you, a man in black with a Mein Kampf look. Unconventional. It's a hopscotch across her familiar sorrows, but leaps into uncharted territories of personal and historical trauma. A continuation? Bah, it's innovation.
A bold assertion, Percy, what says your romantic heart?
As the vessel of revolutionary spirit and the harbinger of change, I say Daddy weaves the personal with the universal, a clarion call against tyranny, my friends. The poem asks of us, the boot in the face, the brute heart of a brute like you. Is it not emblematic of societal oppressions? Yes, it is deeply personal, but it speaks to the struggle against all forms of despotism. Thus, it is continuity incarnate, Plath's eternal protest.
Darkness begets darkness. Plath plunges into the abyss with Daddy, crafting from the personal gloom a universal nocturne. Daddy, I have had to kill you. A departure it seems, yet within her canon, it but deepens the shadows she has always explored. In the macabre, she finds continuity.
And yet, my friends, you dally at the surface. Daddy is the knife's edge, slicing into the fabric of post-war America, critiquing gender roles, and rebelling against the father figure of societal norms. If I've killed one man, I've killed two, the vampire who said he was you. The poem's very heart pulses with the beat of confrontation and liberation. It isn't a departure, but an evolution of her thematic concerns, more raw, more real.
Ah, Alan, always the revolutionary at heart. But is evolution not, in its essence, a departure as well as a continuation?
Would we say then that Daddy is Plath wearing her heart, not on her sleeve, but etched into the very skin, a canvas both painfully intimate and staggeringly broad?
Indeed, it seems we are bound in agreement that Daddy straddles the lines of past exploration and bold new territory. Thus, in its complexity, we find Sylvia Plath's brilliance, continuing her interrogation of the self, the father, the male, and her world. Each line a testament to her unparalleled ability to navigate the personal and the universal, the specific and the allegorical.
And let us not forget, amidst our debate, Plath's piercing cry against the silencing of women's voices. In Daddy, she roars.
A roar indeed, Alan, that echoes through time, as relevant now as it was then. Sylvia Plath, with Daddy, has etched her name in the annals of those who dared to speak, to break, to question, and for that, we owe her our deepest thanks.
A fitting homage, Oscar. As our discussion draws to a close, let us remember Daddy as a poem that challenges, disturbs, and illuminates, ensnaring us in the web of Sylvia Plath's formidable mind. The shadow of Sylvia Plath's suicide looms large over Daddy, doesn't it? This posthumous context, how does it color our reading?
Indeed, the spectre of her untimely demise adds a certain morbid curiosity. But should we not strive to separate the art from the artist? As Plath herself writes, Daddy, I have had to kill you. Does this not speak volumes on its own, without the whispers of her personal tragedy?
Oscar, that's naive. Her life, her struggles, they're woven into the fabric of her poetry. I thought every German was you. Plath confronts not just a personal but a historical trauma, meshed with her own narrative. Her life and poetry cannot and should not be divorced from each other.
Life's not a paragraph, and death, I think, is no parentheses. The starkness of her life breathes through Daddy. You feel her, alive, battling in verse, her history as palpable as her words. Can we overlook that?
Yet, should not a poem stand on its own, transcending the mortal coil of its creator? The boot in the face, the brute heart of a brute like you. This line, powerful, evocative, is it diminished if stripped of Plath's personal sorrow? Does not the beauty, the anger, the artistry of Daddy reach beyond the grasp of biography?
But Percy, to ignore the shadow death casts upon this work is akin to reading in the dark. The knowledge of her death, and the villagers never liked you, adds an undeniable depth to our interpretation. The echoes of her life and her eventual choice to end it resonate within her words, giving them a chilling afterlife.
Edgar, that's exactly it. I may be a bit of a Jew. Plath's exploration of identity, her confrontation with death, it's both personal and universal. It fills her words with a haunting prescience, a voice from beyond the grave.
Alan, Edgar, your obsession with the macabre aspects of Plath's life risks overshadowing the art itself. Must we tether her genius solely to the tragic arc of her biography? Daddy, you bastard, I'm through. Yes, it's a cry of defiance, but it's also a declaration of artistic independence, is it not?
Genius walks a razor's edge twixt brilliance and despair. The crackling energy of Daddy, like lightning, might strike whether Sylvia Plath lived or died, but knowing the storm from which it came, how can we look away?
It's clear, then, that we're divided. The impact of Plath's posthumous reputation is a prism, splitting our view of Daddy into myriad colors of interpretation. And yet, whether viewed as a standalone masterpiece or a chapter in a tragic biography, its compelling power is undiminished. Today, we delve into ethical implications, the use of deeply personal and potentially offensive imagery. Sylvia Plath's Daddy intertwines personal trauma with collective historical events. A bold choice, indeed.
Imagine if Sylvia were here, she'd say, "I have always been scared of you." Plath strips bare the fabric of her being, using Holocaust imagery not to offend, but to unveil the depth of personal trauma. Like tossing Molotovs into our placid lakes of empathy, she demands we confront the complexity of pain.
Ah, but here, my dear Alan, lies the rub. While Plath's linguistic acrobatics stun the senses, with my Gypsy ancestress and my weird luck, and my tarot pack, one wonders if the gravity of the Holocaust can truly serve personal metaphor without stripping the tragedy of its own intrinsic horror. And yet, doesn't she draw a vivid line connecting the personal to the political? "I thought every German was you," she says. The personal is not only political, but historical. Plath's outcry becomes a clarion call against oppressive structures, transcending the individual to voice collective anguish.
But to use such imagery, isn't it like saying, I may be a model of your filth, playing at symbiosis of the tragic, the historical, personal made universal? Yet, is it right? The words noose tight around broad necks of understanding may be too tight, converging lines meant never to cross.
Darkness begets darkness. I have always been scared of you, she confesses. Plath summons our greatest fear, not the external evils, but those nestled within the catacombs of our own souls. Is it ethical? Poetry, like the raven, respects no bounds. It is the light in darkness and sometimes the darkness itself.
Edgar, you see the depth. It's about confrontation. If I've killed one man, I've killed two. Plath knew to shake us from apathy requires shocking imagery, even if it bruises sensibilities. Liberation of one's voice often comes at the cost of comfort.
Boldness aside, could not the same impact have been achieved with less controversy? A man in black with a Mein Kampf look does indeed shock, but does it enlighten, or does it merely alienate? Oscar, my friend, enlightenment often comes swaddled in discomfort. Controversy is the spark of conversation, igniting fires of thought. Plath's articulation asks us not to sit idly by, but to engage and reflect.
Can we ever stand outside her black shoe, in which I have lived like a foot? The personal so entwined with the vast, does it not ask too much? To understand, to forgive the voice in venom, for the sake of seeing, truly seeing.
Our journey through Daddy has taken us from admiration to indignation, from personal resonance to ethical quandary. Plath's work, undeniably powerful, leaves us questioning the responsibility one holds in wielding such potent imagery.
Through the discomfort, we find growth. Plath's courage in confronting her demons paves the way for our own battles with history, memory, and identity.
Indeed, Daddy remains a spectral figure, looming over the landscape of modern poetry, its shadows long and contours sharp, reminding us that to confront our nightmare, we must first name it.
As our discussion draws to a close, let us reflect on the enduring power of Daddy. It's a poem that has provoked and inspired in equal measure. Some find in it a mirror of Plath's own turmoils, while others see a broader critique of patriarchal society. What say you, Poe?
Daddy speaks of a black shoe in which the daughter has lived, a vivid encapsulation of suffocation under paternal authority. Plath weaves this narrative with the skill of a true tragedian, dark and morose, much like the worlds I've often depicted. Yet, how we interpret her outcry, whether as an indictment of the father alone or of all domineering forces, varies wildly.
You cling to darkness, Edgar, but let's not forget Plath's fight against oppression. Her cry, "Daddy, Daddy, you bastard, I'm through," isn't just a personal vendetta. It's a rallying cry for all who've been trampled by societal and familial expectations. She channels her fury into a beacon for liberation, a concept you, trapped in your dreariness, fail to appreciate.
Indeed, Alan, but stirring the pot as always. Plath's artistry is in her audacity, the sheer boldness in conflating personal anguish with historical atrocity. Yet is it not our duty, as artists, to provoke, to challenge? Edgar's fascination with the macabre, your own rebellion against conformity, and Miss Dickinson's exploration of the soul's landscapes, are these not different expressions of the same desire to upend the status quo?
Curious, Oscar, how swiftly your eloquence dances around the fire, yet it is Plath who thrusts her hand into the blaze, the flames licking her skin as she declares herself through the ashes of her despair. Her play with language, unfettered, unbound, maps a landscape more vast than any traditional form could contain. Through this, she finds her true voice, a feat most admirable and, I dare say, revolutionary.
The I in Plath's work, grappling with the you, a father and a foe, encapsulates the eternal struggle against tyranny. Her verse, this behemoth birthed from strife, mirrors our own rebellions, does it not? Her voice, though quelled by the mortal coil, kindles fires in the hearts of those who follow. This poem, Daddy, a testament, a beacon, a warning.
Our hearts, minds, sometimes at war with the roles foisted upon us by fate, find in Daddy a kind of kinship. Plath navigates the labyrinth of personal despair and societal critique with a deftness that leaves us pondering long after the final line. Each voice at this table, discordant as it may seem, underscores the multifaceted interpretations Daddy invokes. The power of poetry to unsettle, to inspire, Plath wields it unflinchingly. Shall we let her have the last word, then? I'm through.